So Monday we went through the NFC East. We went through the standings there. We went through what teams' situations are looking like for the 2024 season. But today we're gonna go through the NFC South, and obviously we're gonna go through the standings as before. We're gonna do the same procedure here. I'll try to make it a little bit faster. It was like 16 minutes in the previous video. Let's get into it. This is Son of a Sports. All right, I have Atlanta winning this division. This division is not as bad as it was last year. I think I think three teams improved. I think they really improved, and Atlanta has a better quarterback situation. I think I like their coaching staff. I was really confident before the draft, and then Penix happened. I was wondering what kind of decision making they're making in Atlanta. They've had some issues the past few years in terms of their coaching situation, but they have a new coaching staff. Raheem Morris is a good coach, and I like Zach Robinson. That was an incredible hire. I really love that for their offense. They signed Darnell Mooney, They traded for Rondell Moore to be the wide receivers 2 and 3 with Drake London. You know, Kyle Pitts is still there, and I think Kyle Pitts will have a better role here. Tight ends do well in Shanahan systems, and that's basically what they're going to run here. It's a Shanahan coaching tree still. Their offensive line is a very good rushing offensive line unit. Passing-wise, there's still little questions here and there. I think Bergeron will look better next year in year two. I do feel confident the offensive line can hold up enough for Kirk Cousins to still have a pretty good season. Bijan, I think, will look really good. People act like Bijan wasn't that good in his rookie year, and he still was. They just didn't play him very much. There were games where they didn't play him until the very end. I remember that one game. Tyler Algier will still be his backup. Like, there's not much changing here. Looking at the defense, there's still a little bit of questions. I like their defensive coordinator. I like the defensive system that they're going to run. But Grady Jarrett's coming off a serious injury. Rook Okoro was not my favorite draft pick whatsoever. Johnny Newton was on the board, and they didn't take him. If they were going to take defensive line, which they should have, they probably should have looked at edge rusher. They didn't. They moved to interior defensive line, and they went with the guy that was like 4 spots lower in his positional rankings than who they should have gotten at Johnny Newton. Looking at the corners, AJ Terrell is pretty much it. Mike Hughes is pretty good or pretty decent. Zach, I really just don't love their corner group outside of AJ Terrell, and he had a little bit of a down year last year. Looking at the safety room though, Richie Grant and DeMarco Helms, that's a pretty good group. But Jesse Bates, I mean, he'll still have an incredible year. He's an incredible safety. He played really good. Their defense, despite having a serious lack of talent, was still like top 12 last year. So I expect that group to at least still remain in that. I think their defense is still building. I think it's more of a 2 years from now type of defense instead of this year type of defense. Looking at the schedule and all of that, I think I'm going to say this team ends up going 11-6 this year. This team is still not at the top of the NFC in terms of roster building, but this team is still pretty good. I think they're a good playoff team. And if they don't win this division, I'll talk about who else can win this division later, but I still see them making the playoffs. Like, the NFC is a little bit weaker, and I know I talked about in the NFC East video, there's still teams in the NFC that can do good, but the NFC is still the relatively weaker conference, and I could definitely see this team pulling out something. Like the Falcons, the Buccaneers have one of the easier schedules in the NFL. The Falcons have the easiest. I should have mentioned that when I was talking about them, but the Bucs have the 10th easiest. Let's start with the offense. Baker Mayfield, I think, will be a little bit worse this year compared to last year. Dave Canales is no longer the offensive coordinator. He's the coach of the Panthers. I'll mention him in a little bit. This is the same division. So I think Baker Mayfield won't have the same success as he did last year. And Baker Mayfield didn't look perfect all of last year. But looking at the receiving core, I mean, Jalen McMillan was an incredible draft pick. I was very impressed that they did that. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, we know how good they are. Trey Palmer was a good signing. Sterling Shepard might have very little left to his game. He almost retired this offseason. But he's still a good receiving guy to have in your group, and a good veteran to have for the younger guys like Jalen McMillan. Looking at the running back room, Bucky Irving was a good draft pick. I really liked it. Rachaad White, I think, is a good running back. I know statistically he had some negative traits to his running game. They rushed a lot with him, and he didn't get as much yards as other running backs. But this Bucs team did not. This Bucs team had the worst rushing offensive line in the NFL. They were not very good in running the ball in terms of protecting the running back. But looking at next year, they just drafted Graham Parton. That's an incredible prospect, and I think he'll look good year one. Tristan Wirfs is still a really good tackle, and he played really well last year. I think this group is different than last year's group, and I think they're going to be better. I think Rachaad White's going to be better because he's still an underrated running back. Looking at the defense, Kalijah Kancey was a good draft pick, and people can't take away from that because he struggled year one. I saw TPS act like, oh, well, he's a bust, I don't think that. He had very good athletic traits. There wasn't a lot that people were concerned about with his game. was a good draft pick, and I think he will improve next year. Vita Vea, I mean, obviously he's still a dog. Logan Hall, I know a lot of people are concerned with him. What I think Tampa Bay might do is slot Chris Braswell in that spot more often. Chris is a very good player. I think he was an incredible draft pick as well. I really love their draft because of Chris as well. Chris really, really reminds me a lot of a much less athletic Will Anderson. He has a lot of poise to his game. He has a lot of knowledge to his game, a lot of in his skill set, in his bag in terms of edge rushing. So I think he'll be better than Logan Hall at that spot. Looking at the rest of the defense, I mean, Levante David, he's got a few more years left in him, and he played well last year. And I think retaining him, I mean, you don't want to go all in a rebuild yet, and you want to try to at least see if you can win now with Baker Mayfield. A lot of people have different opinions about that, but retaining Levante David is and he's a franchise legend, so why not? He's still good. Joe Tyron Shioka, he's a good linebacker still. I really like him, and I think he'll still be good for you. Jamel Dean, retaining him, I know he's older, and he didn't play as well last year and still struggled. I still think he's good. I think he played better than Carlton Davis. Actually, no, he did not play better than Carlton Davis, but he was a good duo right next to Carlton Davis. Their corner room's weaker than last year. Carlton Davis is gone, like I already mentioned. But bringing back Jordan Whitehead, your Super Bowl champion, pairing him right next to Antoine Winfield, I mean, both of them right next to each other, that's still a good group. Tyke Smith, a lot of people said it in the draft process, reminds a lot of people of a lesser version of Antoine Winfield. So there's that. I think this group's a little weaker in terms of corners. I already said that. So I think the defense will be a little worse next year, but I still don't think they'll be that bad. But for this team, I think they still have a shot to win the NFC South. They really showed out at the end of last year. But right now, I think I'm going to have them at 10-7. I think that's going to be my record for them. So, yeah. So, for the Saints, I mean, this team has forced themselves and keeps trying to go all in on these retoolings. They want to stay in a competitive window. They don't want to admit that it's probably time to rebuild. But I like their Talisi Fuaga draft pick. I mean, I've seen some people and known some people I've talked to that don't love it. I think they're moving Trevor Penning to right tackle as well. No, they're not. ESPN's depth chart has him as both left and right tackle. They've admitted that was a bad draft pick and that was a reach, and it was. They messed up in the trade to get him and gave up assets and lost out on a top 10 draft pick. Gave the Eagles the pick that got them Jalen Carter. And on top of that, they just really wasted that pick. If you were going to trade up that high, you should have been better with it, and you weren't. So there's that. Then looking at Cesar Ruiz, Eric McCoy, shout out A&M guy. That's still a good offensive line. Ryan Ramczyk is still trying to come back for next year. He didn't retire. So there's that too. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, that's a good receiving starters. And then you have Cedric Wilson Jr., who still has some left to his game. I trust that he can still be a baller at the NFL level. Equimonious St. Brown's not a bad receiver in a receiver rotation and by any means. Alvin Kamara showed last year he's still got some juice left in the tank. Jamal Williams did not really play much last year. And then Kendre Miller. I mean, a lot of people like that draft pick from last year's draft. Okay, looking at the defense, I mean, Cameron Jordan, Chase Young, that's some good edge rushing help right now. Their interior, I mean, Brian Breezy, I don't think he looked very well his rookie year. I don't remember. I remember seeing people say he looked really good in preseason. Then I remember seeing people say in the regular season he didn't look that good. We'll see. The linebacking core, Willie Gay, Demario Davis, Pete Werner. I mean, it's fine. I mean, Demario Davis is older, and he's still playing really good. Willie Gay was okay with the Chiefs. Their draft pick of Kool-Aid McKinstry, I really did like. I mean, they didn't have a lot of draft picks, but Paulson Adebo, still a really good corner. Marshawn Lattimore, still a really good corner. Kool-Aid McKinstry, still a really good corner. They could trade Marshawn Lattimore at this point. Like, I know I'm doing these videos early, so they could still trade him. Tyrann Mathieu still looked really good last year, too. I mean, he looked worse than his last year's with the Chiefs and his first year in New Orleans, but last year I think he looked a little better. Looked like he still had some left to him. The corner room, I like a lot. I think Chase Young and Cameron Jordan can still give you some on the defensive line. This defense has always at least been decent. The issue with this team is, I mean, they have Derek Carr as quarterback. I haven't even brought up Derek Carr once. So it's not the main issue, but I think this team's ceiling's 9-8. I think that's the best they can get. Okay, Panthers. I'm not going to act like this organization's the dumpster fire it has been for the last year. I think this team has done a lot that I liked. I think they've done a lot to look at and be proud of. Bryce Young, I mean, I didn't think he was horrible last year, and I think there was a lot to look at in his game that you could still be extremely excited about, especially for this new age of football. Looking at their group, I mean, Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard is a good receiving core, and Rashad Penny is like your fourth running back in the rotation right now. I forgot they signed him. You know how underrated he is? I mean, I know the Eagles didn't really play him, but 2 years before then, he was still a pretty good running back. I'm still going to be all in on Rashad Penny at least having a game of 100 rushing yards. Okay, looking at the receiving core, it's a lot better than last year. Jonathan Mingo looked better at the end of the year, and he's wide receiver 4. I mean, I know I'm bringing up wide receiver 4 for them, but I think he looked better at the end of the year. I know there was times where he struggled, but he wasn't really used right in Frank Reich's system. Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Xavier Legette. Xavier Legette was my favorite receiver in this draft. Not saying he was the best receiver in this draft by any means. I'm not. But in terms of how much I liked his personality, how much I liked his game, how much tape I've watched of him to see how good he could be, because there were questions like, why did he break out in his last year? And then you realize prospects are also human beings. I mean, that's not what happened for me. I knew prospects were human beings, but you see it in real time how much it can happen in people's lives, what can happen in people's lives to affect them. And you see that with Xavier Legette. Like, he was a good receiver. He just struggled because there was a lot going on in his life. And the 1 year that he actually, things weren't really destroying him, he showed that he is a very good player. And I really, really like his game. Adam Thielen showed there's still a lot left to his game. And he doesn't have to be wide receiver 1 anymore. You have Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, and Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen's your slot guy. Deontay Johnson's more of your, intermediate, I would say, deep threat type of guy. And then Xavier Legette gives you the physicality and the speed to play a long-term field. Like, looking at him, I know Dave Canales is going to try some plays where he's more like their Debo role. Even, I know they're from the same college, but they work out together. They did go to the same college, and they remind me a lot of each other. Looking at the offensive line, Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt were their 2 big pieces in the offseason. Like, they're 2 big signings. I think this offensive line is completely different. Like, I think this team is completely different in terms of offense. They stayed with the same tackles. Ike Ekwonu was, like, the number 6th pick. No, that was Evan Neal. He was number 4 or 5 in 2022's draft. 2022. Yes. So it's not time to give up on him yet. I think that giving him a chance, even though he struggled last year, even though he was next to a bad guard, it gives him a chance. Austin Corbett was their guy from last year that really struggled at guard, but I think moving him to center helps a lot. Taylor Morton, I know they locked him down on a deal. That's interesting to see. Damian Lewis is not a great guard, but you wanted to spend money on a guard. You got one. And Robert Hunt is a great guard. I really like that signing. Even if it was a lot of money, you invest in the offensive line, and the cap is going up every single year in the NFL. This is the issue with the Panthers, their defense. J.C. Horn's a good player. Derek Brown is an incredible player. Both of them are incredible players, really. Jadeveon Clowney showed last year he still got some in the tank, and I was a Jadeveon Clowney hater for years, but he finally learned edge rush moves in year 10. Shaq Thompson still has a little bit to him. Josie Jewell was a good signing, but this is still a rebuild. Like, this, by all means, this is still a rebuild. This team still needs to invest in all avenues on edge rushing because you just lost Brian Burns. You traded him. You need another corner. You need probably 2 more corners. You need to rebuild the safety room. And yeah, like, this team is still nowhere near contention because of their defense and because we don't know what Bryce could be yet. But for right now, I know this team is tanking because this is a very deep defensive draft. This draft is worse than 2024's draft, but this class is incredible defensively. If you go next year and you have a top 5 pick and you're able to go get like James Pearson or Nick Scorton from A&M, shout out A&M, I think this defense is improved by a lot. We'll see, but yeah. So yeah, that's my NFC South. Falcons, Bucks, Saints, Panthers. And if I didn't say the Panthers, what I think the record will be, I think it's going to be 5-12 or 4-13 if you want to go a little bit worse than that. This team has I think it's still top 10 schedule in terms of easiness, but I just don't think this team has enough defense to be able to go through next year. I think last year their offense was horrible and their defense was good. I think next year their offense is going to be at least middle of the pack. Maybe not. Maybe the offense will show improvements. I think the defense is going to be a bottom 5 unit in the NFL. The talent on defense is just not there. Derek Brown and J.C. Horn are their main stars. Outside of that, there's just really not much to look at. I mean, Josie Jewell, he might be a trade deadline guy because he'll show a lot of talent, and they might not have him in the long-term plans. But yeah, that is my NFC South. I will probably do NFC North next. or NFC West. I don't know. Either way, this is Son of a Sports, and I'll catch y'all next time.